and welcome back to the podcast, Steve Taylor.
Hi, Paul. Great to be with you again.
Yeah, I think you're the most frequent guest on my show. Did you know that?
Is that right? Well,
Yeah.
that's a privilege.
Yeah, you're here for the third time running, and you're here because I've got a copy of your incredible book, Time Expansion Experiences, which wanted to do a deep dive in with you to explore what this means and how this could actually benefit anyone who's listening. I'd really recommend the book. It's a fantastic book. But what would they get out of learning about time expansion experiences? That's it. Let's start there. That's a good place to start.
What can they learn about time
Yeah.
expansion experiences?
Yeah, for themselves. Well, how would they benefit?
Well, how could they benefit?
Yeah.
Well, many of us feel that time is an enemy. We feel that time is always running against us. We're always running short of time. We're always fighting against deadlines. We feel like, the clock is running down, and in a few years we'll meet our demise. So we feel that time is an enemy. But what I show in the book is that time, in a sense, it doesn't really exist. And even when it does, appear to exist, it's so flexible and kind of insubstantial that it's easy for us to have some sort of control over time. We can control the way that we perceive time, the way that we experience time. And that can take away, the power that time has over us. We can have power over time, which means that we don't have to let it dominate us, and we don't have to feel that it's our enemy.
I love that. So how do we do that? How can we begin to explore time and be more open to the idea that it's not real? Because I think some people listening to that will be like, what? Time seems to go very slowly for me today, or too fast, so it feels real. Let's start there. How can we begin to look at time differently?
Well, the first point is that, as you just suggested, it's flexible. We all experience time in different ways and different situations. We all know that it seems to go slowly when we're bored. It seems to go quickly when we're absorbed in activities. It seems to go slowly when we're in new environments. New experience seems to make time slow down. And we unconsciously do take measures to change the speed of time. If we have to wait for something, or if we're on a long flight, we try to make the time pass quickly by watching films, by chatting to our neighbors, the people sitting next to us. So we unconsciously get into a state of absorption to make time pass quickly. But what I call time expansion experiences are much more extreme than that. They occur in accident situations, emergency situations. They occur in moments of spiritual experience, in moments of deep meditation or intense presence. In these time expansion experiences, it's not just a mild variation by which a couple of hours may seem to pass like half an hour, or maybe like 4 hours if time's going slowly. In time expansion experiences, a few seconds can expand into 2 minutes or longer. And in the most intense time expansion experiences, a few seconds could expand into hours or even days.
How? I've read your book, but for the listener, how does that happen? Because how did you get into this? Let's start how you got into this, and then look at how this actually happens for us.
I got into it because of my own experiences. There was an experience I had about 20 years ago, which was kind of a mystical experience, an intense spiritual experience. And it was just when I was walking in Scotland on the coast, staring at the ocean. It was a rainy, stormy day, and I was looking at the rocks. I was on my own. The seagulls are flying by, and I just stopped to admire the scene. And it suddenly struck me that this scene would have been exactly the same 10,000 years ago. And 10,000 years in the future, it would probably still be exactly the same. That was just a kind of intellectual thought I had. But within a few seconds, I seemed to switch into a meditative state of stillness. And suddenly, I felt as if I was actually there 10,000 years in the past, and also 10,000 years in the future. So it was almost as if time disappeared, time ceased to be linear, it became kind of spatial. And I felt like, in a sense, I was part of eternity. The present moment seemed to expand into an eternity. And in a sense, time just didn't exist anymore. I seemed to transcend time altogether. So that set me thinking. That made me realize that, time, in a sense, seems to be a construct of the normal mind.
Mm.
And if you go into a spiritual or mystical state, then time seems to dissolve. But then about 10 years after that, which is about 10 years ago from the present, I had a car accident in which time, a few seconds of turmoil and trauma on the motorway when our car was spinning around, in the midst of lots of other cars speeding towards us. And, it was a time when I thought, wow, this could be it. I could be dead here. This is really dangerous. What happened was that a truck clipped the back of our car when we were in the middle lane. You tried to move out into the middle lane without seeing us. So we were spinning around. And luckily, well, whether it was just luck, I don't know. I felt as though I had a lot of time to take some action. I felt as though I had a lot of time to think about the situation and to try to take some methodical action. So I tried to pull the steering wheel towards the right, tried to use a handbrake and other things. And luckily, we moved towards the hard shoulder and crashed into a barrier. And then time seemed to switch to a normal speed again. And I seemed to switch back into a normal state of consciousness. But those few seconds of the car crash seemed to last for much, much longer. I would, in my mind, they were probably like 1 minute. So a few seconds seemed to expand into 1 minute. And again, that reminded me that time seems to be a construct. You step outside a normal state of consciousness and you step outside our normal experience of time. So after that, I started to collect reports of time expansion experiences, and I began to analyze and examine them.
I mean, it's a powerful story, and what got me thinking was, why does this happen? Is this a survival technique, an evolutionary strategy, so that we can do something in that expanded version of time? Because in your story, in your book, there's some amazing. If you could recount anything that comes to mind, some amazing stories just like yours of people experiencing quite severe accidents, but yet time slowed down to the point where they were able to do something about it.
That's right. Yeah, maybe I can just share one case from my book. This was an emergency situation, a robbery, where an American woman her husband was leaving for work, and she heard lots of sort of shouting and fighting outside the house. And she ran onto her balcony and saw that two burglars were trying to break into the house, and her husband was trying to stop them. So she had a replica gun, and she ran to get it. She pointed it at the burglars, but they had a real gun. They pointed their real gun at her and fired at her. And they fired at her 4 times. And she said it probably took 2 or 3 seconds for the shots to move towards her. But in her mind, time kind of opened up, and she had a lot of time to consider the situation. She was actually 7 months pregnant. And she remembered that the previous evening she'd seen a film about a gunman. And the gunman had said, if ever you get shot at, the first thing to do is just fall to the ground, just leap onto the ground as fast as you can. So she thought, yeah, I'll do that. I remember that. I'll do that. But then she thought, wow, hold on, I'm 7 months pregnant. I've got to fall in such a way that I don't harm my baby. So she did that. She fell in such a way that she didn't land on her stomach and damage the baby. But again, in her mind, she said that those 2 or 3 seconds seemed to last for about half a minute in her subjective awareness. And she felt that that time allowed her to think about the situation and to take the appropriate action. She didn't think she would have been able to do that without the time expansion. And a lot of people say that. They say that again and again, that the time expansion was a real phenomenon, and it allowed them to take preventative action to save them from danger, to even save them from death in many cases. So what you said about the survival explanation, that makes some sense.
Yeah.
Maybe it could be an evolutionary adaptation from our ancestors. You can imagine our ancestors in jungles when they were confronted with wild animals like tigers, and they had to take evasive action very quickly, or maybe natural disasters. So that's possible. The only thing that kind of works against that theory is that time expansion experiences also occur in non-emergency situations. They can occur in meditation, in moments of spiritual presence. They can occur under the influence of psychedelics. So, then those are not kind of survival, life or death situations.
Yeah, I was questioning that theory. I was thinking, is this? But you're right. It's when I hypnotize someone, which is rare these days, but sometimes I hypnotize a client for just to help them with their mindset, and it's amazing how this is where time seems to speed up. They'll be under hypnosis, a trance for about 45 minutes, but when they come back, they're like,
Yeah.
"Oh, that felt like 5."
Yeah, I've
How
had
long
that
was I gone
experience on
for?
hypnosis.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So time expands and what contract. How is I'm
It
wondering.
can contract as
Yeah.
well. Hmm. Well, the
Yeah.
thing about time contraction is it's related to absorption. When you're in a state of deep absorption,
Hmm.
time contracts. That's why flow, when you're absorbed in an activity, in a challenging and stimulating activity, that makes time pass quickly. And hypnosis too, I guess you could say that hypnosis is a form of absorption. It's a situation in which you lose awareness of your surroundings and become focused. It's also one of the important things about flow is that, and I guess this applies to hypnosis, is that your mind becomes quiet. We don't have that kind of normal associational chatter running through our minds. So with our minds becoming quiet, there's a lack of information processing, which seems to speed time up. Whereas when our mind processes a lot of information, that can make time slow down, which is why boredom makes time slow down, because in boredom, your mind is very active. There's a lot of associational chatter running through your consciousness, which stretches time. And that also applies to new experiences. When you have new experiences, when you're in new environments, there's a lot of new information around you that you're alert to, which also stretches time.
Yeah, time is a funny thing, isn't it? And in your view, what is time? Just as we try to get a little bit of clarification, it's like what is it we're
Well,
actually talking about here for people? Because there's psychological time, linear time. How are we referring to?
well, I guess one important term is duration. There is
Yeah.
duration. Processes have a certain duration. The day and night have a certain duration. The seasons have a certain duration. The year has a duration. So these are real physical phenomena which last for a certain amount of time. I guess you could say that our bodies have a certain duration too. We live kind of cyclical lives from birth to death, or everything depends on duration. But time, I guess you could say time is a man-made construct. When we split hours into minutes and seconds, that's a purely man-made construct. It's a product of the human mind. But even duration is very flexible. Duration can stretch or dilate or contract, according to our state of mind. But I mean, in the book, I talk a lot about linear time. Linear time is our impression that time moves in a certain direction, that it moves away from the present into the future. It moves from the past into the present and then into the future like an arrow. But I suggest that linear time doesn't really exist, because in some sense, the future seems to already exist and the past seems to still exist. So that's difficult to get our head around, but it seems to be the truth.
Okay, so let's start there then. It's such a fascinating subject, and I think people might be going, "What?" But I think opening our minds to this, I think, is quite important, especially with some of the messages you've put forward in the book. But why would it be important for someone to be open to the idea that, well, the future exists and the past still exists, doesn't exist? What is it that's
Well,
going on?
it's not necessarily beneficial to us, but it seems to be a fact. It seems to be a fundamental fact of the universe that the past is still in existence and the future already exists. And this comes from what I call time cessation experiences. I have two main terms: time expansion experiences and time cessation experiences. And cessation means that time stops or ceases to exist or disappears. And when people have time cessation experiences, a bit like the experience I described when I was on holiday in Scotland. There is this awareness that the now isn't everything, that somehow the future and the past are part of the present, that time is like a landscape rather than a straight line. Time is spatial rather than linear. So this comes from people's experiences in NDEs, in near-death experiences. It comes from the life review, which often happens in near-death experiences when people relive. They don't just recall in their memories, they actually relive their previous experiences as if they are still alive, as if those experiences still exist. They relive them very intensely in a very sort of sensory way from multiple perspectives. But also in near-death experiences, some people report visions of the future, which turn out to be real, which later come to pass. But also, it comes from precognition as well. There are many well-examined, rigorously tested cases of precognition. There are many experimental studies which suggest that precognition exists. And if precognition is real, then it suggests that the future already exists. We can only glimpse the future in the present if it already exists in some form. And it also links to physics as well. There are many theories in physics which suggest the same view of reality.
Again, it's just opened it up into a whole new pathway, isn't it? So that's the thing about how fascinating the subject is. You've experienced your own sort of precognition experience, haven't you? Which I bet you wish you placed a bet, didn't you?
Yeah, well, there was one researcher on precognition once said that precognitive experiences tend to be very macrocosmic major events like world disasters,
okay,
or they can be completely trivial. You know, they tend to not fall into the middle ground, be either incredibly important or incredibly trivial. So unfortunately, mine tend to be incredibly trivial. Mine are mainly related to football matches. Yeah, there was one precognitive dream I had when it was a day before England were playing Germany at football. This was back in 2001, something like that. And in my dream, I saw the TV screen and the score said, England 4, Germany 1. And I woke up in the morning thinking, wow, that's crazy. That can't happen. I think at that point, England hadn't beaten Germany for 50 years or something. And
Yeah.
Germany hadn't been beaten for 10 years or something like that. So I think that can't happen. That's ridiculous. So I didn't even think of placing a bet on it. And then I went round to my friend's house to watch the match. And we were watching it. Then it got to like 3-1. I thought, wow, that's interesting. England had beaten Germany 3-1. And then it came up as 4-1. And then I remembered the dream. And I thought, wow, this is incredible. This is my dream. It was exactly as I saw it in my dream. And I think England scored again to make it 5-1 in the end. But yeah, I mean, that was such an unlikely occurrence that I don't think it was random. And I very rarely, I've only had a few of those dreams. It's not as though I dream about football every night, fortunately. So I'm sure it was a real precognitive dream.
Wow. I mean, it's something that came to when I was reading that in your book. I often, and then I was thinking, well, is this the observer effect? And then later on in the book, you talk about that, funnily enough. But it's in a sense, are we predicting a possible future if we have precognition, abilities? Are we focusing on a possible future, and then from that sort of focus and energy put into it from us, are we then more likely to make it happen? Or is there, do you think, one kind of set future? Or
well, it's possible, but I mean, there are many well-attested cases of precognition about major world events like disasters, earthquakes, plane crashes, things of that sort. So it's difficult to think that a person could have manifested a major event like that. It looks like they were just glimpsing a major future event. And if anybody wants to look those up, I'd look into the case of a man called David Mandel, who was an artist who drew pictures of major world disasters years before they happened. Very specific, accurate pictures with a lot of information about them. He's probably one of the most interesting cases. But I guess that's one of the issues about precognition. Does it suggest that the future is set in stone and that we don't have any free will. If the future is set in stone, we don't have any free will. It doesn't matter what we think. I might decide to do this or do that, but it doesn't matter because the future's already decided. I'm kind of inexorably pulled towards the future, no matter what I do. So you could think, I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to let the future take place. But somehow it will take place anyway. But what seems to be the case is that it's not completely set in stone. It seems to be about probability and potentiality rather than a fixed future. One reason for that is that there are some precognitive experiences when people see themselves having accidents, and then maybe a day or two later they see the scene in reality, and they remember the dream, but they take evasive action at the last moment because of the dream. So obviously that precognition is not accurate because they didn't actually have the accident. And there are some near-death experiences when people, they're presented with a choice. They feel that if they choose to go back to their bodies, this is the future they will have. But they can choose not to go back to their bodies, in which case the future will not manifest itself. So, and this fits, quantum physics is a very complex and very debated area, but it fits with quantum physics too, the idea that, it's all about probability and potentiality rather than a fixed reality.
I love that. And again, these life reviews, could you explain a little bit more about, is there, some people talk about DMT from the pineal gland being released, and that's one of the reasons why we have the, that sort of warm feeling and rush towards the light and life review. Is that your view, or what else do you think is going on for there to be a life review? Because it's reported, so it's a common event.
Yeah, it's very common. I'm quite skeptical about the DMT theory because there's no evidence that the brain produces a lot of DMT when we're close to death. I think it's not even clear that we do actually contain DMT in our bodies. I think some people still debate that, whether it's actually the case. But even if we did have DMT in our bodies, it would be such a microscopic amount that it could never produce an intense experience, like a near-death experience, unless there was some sort of flood of DMT when we're close to death. But again, there's no evidence for that. And also, if you compare DMT experiences to near-death experiences, they're actually quite different. They have some similarities, but the core aspects of near-death experiences, like traveling towards a light, and sometimes meeting deceased relatives, the life review, they don't happen in DMT experiences. But the life review seems to happen either when people are close to death, like when they're falling to the ground from a mountain, for example, or when they're near to drowning, or it happens when they are clinically dead for a short time, after an accident or a medical emergency, when their brain is no longer functioning, there's no blood, they're no longer breathing and no blood is flowing to their brain. So that's when a life review can happen. And I think it happens in around a third of near-death experiences. So it is quite common. And the characteristics of life reviews are very similar. People have reported them since the 18th century. I think that was one of the first reports in the 18th century by a sailor. And they're very consistent. They are a recall of previous experiences. In most cases, people recall every experience they've ever had, literally from birth to the present moment. And this takes place usually in a matter of a few seconds. So in a sense, that is the most dramatic time expansion of all. How is it possible to relive a whole lifetime of events within a few seconds? But people do report that time and time again. Not just, as I said before, not just like as if they are recalling memories. It is actually a reliving of the experience in a sensory way, sometimes from the perspective of other people who witnessed the experiences or who were involved in the experiences. In some cases, it's not every event, it's the most significant events of a person's life. But there are a few physiological attempts to explain the life review, but none of them are satisfactory in any way. There is no physiological or neurological explanation for it.
What do you think happens? Why, if it was something else, what would be the purpose of it?
They happen because, they occur in a different state of consciousness, in a radically altered state of consciousness, in which time is revealed to be no longer linear, but spatial. they occur, similar to mystical experiences when all time seems to be present in the now.
Mm.
In the life review, we seem to just shift into a different state of consciousness in which we perceive time as spatial. It becomes panoramic rather than just a straight line. So that's why I suggest that it does seem to be a fundamental reality that all time is spatial. It's kind of laid out in a panorama, like a landscape. So in the life review, we're simply glimpsing the landscape. We're simply looking over this landscape of experiences which constitutes our life. And that's the only reason why we can actually, why we can actually relive these experiences, because we're seeing them as part of a panorama. We're overlooking them and glancing over them in a matter of a few seconds of normal time.
Do you know, when you were talking about that just then, it reminded me of what we call awakening, spiritual awakening, that sort of seeing, and experiencing time in a very different way, almost like it doesn't kind of exist. You're just there. And there is like this observer effect that you're just observing what's happening, almost with a sense of curiosity. Well, it is for me anyway. But it reminded me of that. And I know you've talked about that in your book. Is there a correlation? Are we experiencing really with maybe a life review, or even just a time expansion experience? Are we experiencing our true nature?
I think we are. I've always believed that our normal consciousness is quite limited. We often take it for granted that we often assume that we're seeing reality as it is, that our consciousness is telling the truth about the world and about time and about death and everything.
Yeah.
And a lot of materialist scientists, they really take that for granted. Like somebody like Richard Dawkins, he has this very sort of myopic view of reality that he's convinced is the absolute truth. But these kind of experiences, they teach us that, it's just a limited perspective. Our normal consciousness is just a kind of fragmentary perspective on reality. And in spiritual states, our vision of reality expands and our perception becomes heightened. We become aware of a much richer, a much more vivid reality. We become aware of a fundamental connection between all things. We become aware of our fundamental connection to all things. And it's a revelation. We glimpse this kind of realm of harmony and wonder, which is very revelatory. So that when we return to our normal consciousness, if we do, we have a different view of reality. We no longer take our normal vision for granted. We think, this is just this is just one perspective on reality, and there is this wider perspective out there. And maybe I can return to it. Maybe I can practice meditation, maybe take psychedelics if you like, and you can return to that wider vision of reality. And time is a part of that. I mean, time and space are so closely interconnected that, when your spatial awareness changes, when you no longer experience yourself as an isolated, separate entity, and feel a sense of connection to all of the things which happens in spiritual experiences, then your awareness of time also changes. You feel a sense of temporal connection as well.
It's very peaceful, isn't it? To not have to rush, to not have to take part in this. It's we call it psychological time, but the psychology game of time. To not have to, believe that you don't have enough time. And I think there's the egoic story that it comes up with that that time is an enemy. And I think one thing I got from your book is that actually, we can, in a sense, embrace time and begin to utilize it in a way which enhances our life and experience.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, one thing is that if you believe that time is flexible and even illusory, then you can't feel oppressed by it. You can't feel oppressed by an illusion. You can't be afraid of ghosts if you know they don't exist. But also the fact that you can manage time as well. I think it is possible to slip into or to cultivate a certain state of consciousness in which time expands or time ceases to exist. And I think that's one of the goals of meditation, or spiritual development in general. You can become so present that the future and the past cease to exist. Or alternatively, your vision of time can be so expansive that somehow the future and the past become part of the present. But in either way, you're transcending time.
Yeah, I remember it brings to mind an interview I did with Dr. Jose Coros-Mer. He did the book Breakthrough, Mastering Your Default Mode Network. And he was talking about how when your default mode network begins to really quieten, we can have what's known as an awakening experience. And in a sense, you mentioned it earlier, when your default mode, you didn't mention default mode network, but when your ego is very conversational, let's just say, or very chatty about your past and future, in a sense, that impatience often, time is the enemy, I don't have enough, or I'm too old, too young, or war on time with age, or, the stories that it creates, in a sense, creates our battle. And in a sense, it keeps us fixated, doesn't it? It keeps us fixated into this sort of like we're separate individuals struggling with time.
Yeah. Rushing into the future. Whenever you rush, you're essentially rushing away from the present. You're saying no to the present. You're saying, I don't want to be here. I don't like the present. I want to rush into the future. I want to get somewhere else. But when you stop rushing, you embrace the present. And you think, I don't need to be anywhere else. I can't actually be anywhere else. I'm always in the present.
Yeah.
So then you accept the present. You embrace the present. And you lose that niggling, nagging drive to, run into the future.
Yeah, it's madness, isn't it? The idea that we're in the wrong place at the wrong time, in the wrong experience. We believe that we should be somewhere else. And it's that idea that keeps us dissatisfied. I mean, how many people really fantasize about their holiday? And then when they're on holiday, they're already fantasizing about they've got to come back. I'm getting quite sad about it. It's interesting, isn't it? I think the ego loves a bit of time travel.
Yeah. The ego loves to think, basically. It thrives on thinking. Without thinking, it wouldn't exist.
Yeah, that's very true.
So, I mean, one of the best things to think about is the future. You can always think about the future. You can also think about the past. But both of them are a way of escaping from the present. Both of them keep the ego alive. I think ultimately time is created by the ego, and especially by the sense of separation which comes with the ego, which is reinforced by thought. So I think we all find that when our mind is quiet, when the ego becomes soft and its boundaries start to fade away, then we lose our sense of the future and the past. We feel completely at home in the present. And it is almost as if time ceases to exist. I think in all time expansion experiences, what they all have in common is that the boundaries of the ego fade away.
Yeah.
In various different altered states of consciousness. I think accidents are really important because they can produce altered states of consciousness. The sheer shock of an accident or an emergency situation jolts you into a different state of consciousness. And you transcend the boundaries of the normal ego. And therefore you enter a much more expansive space.
Yeah, it reminds me of a skiing trip I went on. And I took a corner very badly and then found myself, and it felt like forever. I felt like I was flying backwards forever, wondering when I was going to land. And I landed, and it was slightly painful. But I always remember that it's one thing that sort of stood out because I just thought, at what point am I landing? But literally it was seconds because my friends were like, oh my God, you shot through the air and just crashed to the floor. But for me, it was, I was just effortlessly gliding backwards, just waiting to connect with the ground.
And I guess you felt a sense of calmness as well, a sense of
absolutely
well-being.
Calm. It was a weird sort of spatial feeling. I was aware of like my whole body and mind, slightly looking in at myself. It was a bit of a mix, but because I could see my face. Whenever I remember it, I can see my face, which is, that would be a bit strange to remember it that way. But I could see my face almost just waiting to hit the floor.
That's one of the... So I was going to say, it's one of the paradoxical things about these experiences is that even though you're close to danger, even though you're potentially involved in a life-threatening incident, people always report a sense of calmness, a sense of well-being, and also a sense of detachment.
Yeah.
Like you said, almost as if they're looking at themselves from above. And I think there is something spiritual about these experiences. They're quite close to, awakening experiences
Yeah.
because of this sense of well-being, sense of detachment, and this heightened awareness. People often report, even in car crashes, which are usually very ugly situations, people report, seeing the glass floating in the air, the glass of a broken windscreen
Wow.
floating through the air, shining in the sunshine like diamonds. Really
Yeah.
beautiful
Yeah.
descriptions of horrific accidents. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of people lose their fear of death as well through these incidents because they've come close to death and they've experienced this amazing serenity. So, they're no longer afraid of those moments when we're close to death anymore.
Yeah. It's a beautiful reminder that there's something bigger than us. We might not fully understand it, and we don't have to subscribe to an exact belief about it, but to enjoy being open to the idea that we're a part of something bigger. And there isn't anything to be frightened of when it comes to our death, and what might be on the other side. I know people often fixate on it, often in a very unhealthy way, but I think these experiences are a beautiful reminder that there's something else,
Mm.
and we might not understand it, but we don't need to fear it.
Exactly. Yeah. As we were saying before, there are a reminder that our normal vision of reality is very
Mm.
narrow. There's much more outside it. And what is outside it seems to be benevolent. There does seem to be some force or harmony that we can trust in. And many people in accident and emergency situations seem to become aware of this.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is. There is a feeling of trust and harmony that comes with these experiences.
No, I 100% agree with that. And I wanted to ask you about synchronicities. We've talked about them on the show before when you've been on. But I was when I was reading your book, I was thinking, when do I experience, something, time expanding? And I notice it when there's going to be a change in my life, like yesterday, just before I wasn't going to go to a meeting, and suddenly it was like time slowed down, and it was like this message: go to that meeting. And I thought, I don't know if
Mm.
I've got, strangely, I don't know if I've got time, but I went to the meeting. I went to the meeting and I got a very important piece of information. I would never have gone to this type of meeting in the first place, but it was very
Mm. Mm.
important for me. It felt like it was, you're meant to be here, so just be there. And I've noticed in
Mm.
the past, thinking back on synchronicities where something important was happening, or even just a reminder that there's something bigger, time slows down a little for you to pay attention to it.
Yeah. In these moments, we're stepping outside the normal kind of matrix of space time. We're receiving messages from the future, possibly.
Maybe.
It's as if, maybe synchronicities are where the past and the future and the present connect. Something from the
Yeah.
future connects with the present. But yeah, I often think that when we have intuitions, feelings that we must do something or must not do something, it may be a message from the future, a kind of precognitive message. I often think that when we have a strong sense of destiny, or we
Yeah.
have a strong sense of something we're meant to do, like a kind of mission in life, that's also a message from the future. We're fulfilling our future state in the present. So yeah,
Yeah, I love
there are all kinds of interesting implications.
Yeah, I love that. When I'm coaching people, I often get them to connect with what would be their ideal future. And the more that they begin to connect with that and align, more authentically with themselves, they seem to begin to manifest it into being, those sometimes in the most surprising ways. So in a sense, it's I believe the future kind of exists, maybe more in more than one version, but the more we begin to focus on it, the more we seem to bring it into our reality, and we do seem to have at times that sense that we know something's going to happen, so we're safe and it's going to be
Mm.
good. Like I was talking to you about my book earlier. I know that
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be published. I don't know in which direction it's going to go to do that. I just know it's going to
Mm-hmm.
happen, so I'm happy to follow the path as it appears.
Yeah.
And I'm very relaxed about it because people ask me all
Mm.
sorts of questions. How are you feeling about it? And I'm like, perfectly good.
Yeah.
I just know it's happening.
I know exactly what you mean. We were talking about this earlier before we were on air, but
Yeah,
I often find in my life that when I try really hard to do something, when I really push and strive, it doesn't work out. Something
yeah,
kind of gets in the way, or I get in my own way. But when I just sort of sit back and relax and think, well, it'll work out. I'm just going to trust in what will happen. I'm not going to consciously try or strive. Then things do work out, almost without my volition. You know, I guess this is what the Tao is all about. It's all about Taoism,
yeah, yeah,
living with the flow rather than trying to push, just allowing your life to take its course. And maybe it's connected to the future. If the future already exists, then we are drawn towards it. And all we can do is allow that to happen. We just go with the flow. And when you try to push things, when you try to strive, you could be working against your own future, which is why it doesn't work out. So,
yeah.
yeah, kind of our deepest intuitions probably arise from our future events or our future experiences.
Yeah, I love that, and I love that. And there was another section of the book I wanted to try and talk to you about before we wrap up. But I'm an athlete. I do a lot of exercise. I go do competitions and things, and being a mindful athlete is quite powerful. How time works differently when you're in certain flow states. Whether I'm skiing or whether I'm doing a high rocks competition or a half marathon, etc., time seems to change completely. And I just wanted to ask
Mm.
you, because it'd be good to hear, because you've talked about this beautifully in the book. How can an athlete utilize time for their advantage? Because some great case studies as well.
Mm. Yeah, many athletes report different states of consciousness in which time either slows down or speeds up. Often it slows down and it allows athletes to function at a very high level. It gives them more time to anticipate their opponents, to prepare their own actions. So it's a great benefit in
Mm.
sport. And I suggest in the book that the highest level athletes, the most elite of the elite, that they have a spontaneous ability to slow down time. I think that probably applies to somebody like Lionel Messi, the footballer.
Yeah.
People sometimes say when they watch him that it's as if he's in a different time zone, a different state of consciousness in which time is going slowly. He seems to have so much time to respond to the tackles of the opponents and to dribble through endless players who are lunging at him. And there are many sports people, who seem to have had that ability, which enables them to reach the highest level of their competition. But I think what these sports people are doing, maybe without consciously being aware of it, they're entering a different state of consciousness, and they're doing it through I call it super absorption. When you become so absorbed
Mm.
that you seem to shift into an entirely different state of consciousness. In a normal state of flow or absorption, time seems to go quickly. But when you get into an especially intense state of absorption or super absorption, time expands as if you step through a gateway and suddenly you're in this landscape of expansive time. So I suggest that if you are a sports person and you want to get into that state of consciousness in which time slows down, you can do it. And you can do it through meditation. I think there are some martial arts where people consciously do that. They
Mm.
consciously meditate, empty their minds in order to slow down time. And there's even research showing that meditation does slow down time. Long-term meditators seem to experience a slower passage of time than others. So meditation is really important. If you're a sports person, I suggest deep meditation, regular meditation, preceding any event or competition. And, particularly right before or during a competition, cultivating that ability to completely empty your mind.
Actually, what you've just said reminds me of something. I was with Shane Benzie. He's going to be coming on the show next year. He did the beautiful book, The Lost Art of Running. And
Uh,
he was in, I'm trying to think if it was Kenya. it was an African country. Anyway, he was trying to work out why everyone was almost relaxing to the point that of, where they were going to be asleep before a big race. And he thought, well, aren't you
Oh,
supposed to
right.
be, getting yourself hyped up and getting yourself ready? And what he learned was they take themselves to this deep, relaxing state before they actually compete in their training, etc. And it just
Ah,
reminded me of what you said, because he was teaching me some techniques. I had running coaching with him, and it was interesting
oh, right.
that even when you're struggling and suffering, there's an embracing of the moment, embracing of the present moment, often with a feeling of
Mm,
gratitude, and that super absorption, begins to kick in. And it was interesting that the
mm,
running techniques he was giving us, it felt like a lot, but when you were running, it felt like almost like you had plenty of time to do it at the same time. So it was a
right.
more present you were, like you were just saying. It's almost like, oh yeah, I can cycle my legs and I can put my foot there and do this, which was happening
Mm,
in milliseconds, really. It was absolutely
wow.
fascinating. So it reminded me
Yeah.
when you were talking about how athletes,
Yeah. That's
that super
really
absorption,
interesting.
embracing time, and how time works differently in that moment. It's very true.
Yeah. That's really interesting. There's a really close connection between time expansion and motor racing, sort of Formula One. A lot of motor racing Formula One drivers report time expansion, and also that feeling of detachment, of kind of
Yeah.
looking at themselves from above, a
Wow.
state of deep relaxation. There was even one driver, I think it was Jackie Stewart. I don't know if you remember him, as a
Yeah,
famous Scottish Formula One
I do.
driver. He said that if you want to be a good racing driver, you have to slow down time. You have
Oh
to,
wow.
you can be hurtling around a corner at 170 miles an hour, but in your mind, the time is going slowly. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to do it.
Yeah,
You wouldn't
yeah,
be able to
yeah.
do it safely. Anyway.
So, besides meditation, which I recommend on this podcast? There are plenty of meditations for people to experience, and it's lovely. The feedback, by the way, from listeners. I just want to say thank you so much for your feedback, because it's gratefully received. I know you love the meditations, but besides meditation, is there anything else people can do to maybe enhance their experience of time, to make it work for them?
Yeah. Hmm. Any activity or situation which softens our ego boundaries can help us to expand time and make us
Yeah.
feel less oppressed by time. So, what one especially effective activity is spending time in nature, walking
Mm.
in a wilderness, through a forest, or climbing a mountain. I often go climbing or walking in the countryside. At the end of the day, I come home and I think, wow, it seems like such a long time since I left in the morning. It seems like 2 or 3 days rather than just a few hours. So much seems to have happened. I've just been walking quietly or climbing a mountain, but so
Yeah.
much has happened. And partly that's information processing, because we absorb so many scenes and landscapes and so many different phenomena. But it's also about softening our ego boundaries. Nature has a very a lovely quality in that it
Mm.
softens our boundaries. It opens us up, and we feel a sense of connection. We feel the stillness of nature, and our ego boundaries open up to embrace the landscape. But also, I think, even though it may not seem to be connected, but an activity like altruism, being kind, generous, altruistic, that also softens our ego boundaries, on a more kind of long term basis,
Mm.
because it makes us less self centered. It connects us more to other people or to other living beings. And again, that sort of softening of our ego boundaries can create an enhanced or expanded sense of time.
Beautiful. I love that. I love that. Quick question. It did make me laugh when I read it in your book. Um, I remember going on beach holidays, and they would pass by so quickly. And then a skiing holiday, it just feels like I've got a really long time to have a lovely ski. Like the skiing day has lasted really long, really long. I've been in the mountains for what feels like forever, but in a lovely way. It doesn't feel like it's dragged. Why is that? Why is, a beach holiday was fun, it was lovely, but why would a beach holiday uh, appear to go past so quickly compared to, say, like a skiing holiday?
Partly it's because when you go on a beach holiday, you go into a fairly familiar environment. It may be a different country, but it's kind of like it's set up to appeal to British people with,
Yeah.
British food and lots of beer and English entertainment. So often new environments bring about time expansion, but in that kind of environment, it's quite familiar. So there's not much time expansion, if any, from the environment.
Mm.
But also, we tend to get into a state of absorption on those kind of holidays too. We spend a lot of time, reading on the beach, maybe listening to podcasts, maybe listening to entertainment in the evening. So again, there's not much new experience and there's a lot of absorption. But when you go on a different kind of holiday, like a skiing trip or an adventure holiday, a trek through a jungle or a mountain expedition, there's so much new experience. There's nothing familiar about it at all. And also, those experiences, those situations, they're kind of spiritual situations. So they involve some degree of ego boundary softening,
Yeah.
Some degree of connection to the landscape, some meditative quality. So all of that makes time expand. So it's both the unfamiliarity and newness, and also the meditative aspect, which softens our ego boundaries.
Yeah, it's very true,
Another
isn't
thing,
it?
maybe this something else which has just occurred to me is that when you go on a beach holiday, people generally drink quite a lot, and alcohol tends to speed up time, so that could be a factor too. Psychedelics slow down time, but alcohol speeds up time.
Yeah, it's definitely. I used to drink. It's only 2 years since I've had a drink, and yeah,
Oh,
time
really?
has worked very differently since then. Very differently since then.
Oh, great.
Yeah, and there's something in the mountains. There's a lot of awe, isn't there? You're sort of like, oh, it's just incredibly beautiful. And
Mm.
obviously, getting down the mountain, in one piece, there's a lot that comes with that. But yeah, there's something very expansive about that environment, and you can sense yourself experiencing time differently.
That's right. Maybe it goes back to the connection between time and space. Maybe when space is so expansive, when space is limitless, like it is on top of a mountain overlooking the landscape, that probably expands time too. It's like Einstein said, time and space are the same thing. You can't separate them. So changes in space also bring changes to time.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much, Steve, for coming on today and talking about your book. I'm going to challenge you. What would be 2 reasons why someone should buy this book? 2 big reasons. Put you on the spot. I know
Two
what I
big
know what I'd get
reasons.
from it. Yeah, two really good reasons. Just 2 reasons. There's lots of reasons, but 2 really good reasons that people go buy my book because.
To understand a phenomenon that's never really been explained before, which
Yeah,
is time expansion experiences.
yeah,
I invented that term, and nobody's really studied these experiences before. And I think I can explain them. That's one reason.
yeah.
And second, to develop some abilities to expand and control your own sense of time, so that you no longer feel that you're at the mercy of time and that time is your enemy.
Become a time master.
A time master.
Time master. That's the next book for you. Become a time
Yeah.
mastering time.
Sounds like
Mastering.
Doctor Who.
It does sound like Doctor Who. I think that's what when we talk about time, people think about time travel, time. There's a sort of the science fiction side of things, and in a sense, there's elements of your book which I love and that talk about it in such a, when we talk about precognition and retrocognition, which we didn't get a chance to talk about, which is viewing the past. So, in a sense, there's a lot here for someone to dive into to understand time in a whole new way. So, I'd heartily recommend it. I read it really quickly. It's a really, really lovely read. My partner read it first. They snatched it off of me and said, "This is mine." So I had to wait for them to finish.
No.
Yeah. But thank you for that. Thank you for coming on your show. So, if anyone wanted to find out more about you and about your book, etc., where could they go?
The best place is my website, which is stephenmtaylor.com. That's Stephen with a V, M for Mark, StephenMTaylor.com. And there you can find all my social media accounts and lots of my articles and some of my poems and interviews and such like.
Yeah, and workshops. Don't forget those.
Yeah, workshops, yeah, online and also real in-person events.
Brilliant. Brilliant. So anyway, thank you very much. And to listeners,
Oh, thank you, Paul.
yeah, and to listeners, thank you so much for joining me for this episode with Stephen Taylor. Please go buy his book, Time Expansion Experiences. It's available on all good bookshops. Please go and buy a copy. It's a really great read. And I'll look forward to connecting with all of you again in the very next episode. Have a very wonderful, peaceful, and present day.